Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to go over 25 tips and tricks for logging. Several years ago we bought quite a few acres of heavily dense forest and cleared and made space for our house, and these are just things that I've learned along the way over the past few years. Working with chainsaws and fallen trees obviously has a lot of dangers to it, so anything that you do, take on with your own risks. Alright, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to go over is if you have a leaning tree like this and you want to cut it go in a different direction than lean. So with this lean of the tree, it's going right into a bunch of trees, but I want to angle it so it goes down the path there. Alright, the first tip is to clear the space around the tree. You always want to make sure that you have two different ways that you can take for safety when you're falling a tree. Then you'll want to cut your wedge anywhere from 1/3 to about halfway through the tree. And then once you're close to that depth, it's good to go behind the tree and aim the cut. So from going behind, you can look perpendicular to the saw and kind of see which direction that the tree is going to want to fall. Alright, then when you go to cut your wedge, a helpful tip is to mark the cut. So here I kind of go on both sides so I can get the right angle of the wedge that I'm wanting. Then when it's time to actually make the cut, doing a rotational type cut is helpful. It allows you to line up one end of the cut with the horizontal cut that you had. But when I went through and did this, I wasn't quite following the mark that I had on there. So I went back and readjusted the cut that I was doing to line up better. Alright, one thing to note when cutting trees, a lot of times they can have rot inside of it, especially with a kind of dead tree like this. And we can see already in the wedge, I can see dead parts of the tree on the inside. Alright, the next tip is to cut relief on the opposite side of the lean. This helps stop the tree from falling the direction of the lean and kind of acts as a hinge to get it to go the direction that you want it to. So to cut in the relief, I just cut down each side and then just a plunge cut through the bottom of it. So if you want to give it even more help, you can cut that horizontal section and open up that wedge there to help it fall further, but in this case I'll just let it be and we'll see how it goes. Alright, to cut the back side, you can use a similar technique to mark the cut and then go ahead and cut it. Alright, so on this tree I had a little bit lean back towards me as well, so as I got close there I started to use wedges so it wouldn't pinch my blade and start kind of falling backwards. And you can see as I'm pushing the wedge in, the top part of the tree is kind of slowly moving over to the direction that we want, and then I simply just gave it an extra little cut on the side there to help release the tree to go. Boom, right on target. Alright, so the next tip when you're cutting is to steer the fall. So you can see here the opposite side of the lean, I left a lot more wood compared to the other side where I actually just end up kind of cutting it off at the end there, but there wasn't much left holding it. So when making the back cut, you can angle it the direction that you want the tree to fall, and especially if it starts to move and it seems to be moving the wrong direction, you can make some final steering adjustments to kind of get it to go the way that you want it to. Here's a look at it in slow motion, and you can see how well the hinge stays together until the two sides of the wedges hit, and then the hinge kind of starts to break apart there. Alright, the next tip is to use sawzalls. So they're helpful for quite a few things. One, like cutting out stumps like shown here. They're also helpful for cutting limbs off of trees. I've also just cut out a lot of smaller trees, just taking the sawzall and plunging it around the tree, cutting the roots, and then just being able to pull it out that way so there's no stump or anything left with it. They're also helpful for any cuts that are just close to the ground where you wouldn't want to use your chainsaw. When cutting branches with a chainsaw, it's good to have a firm base. You don't want to be kind of leaning over where you could fall or tip. So when I'm cutting the branches here, I'm leaning my arms up against my legs just to kind of get a real firm base where the chainsaw is really in control. And really with any cut with a chainsaw, you don't want to be pushing or forcing it through. You just kind of let the chainsaw do the work. When you go to cut a fallen tree, often if you cut from the top, it's going to want to pinch on your blade. You won't be able to cut through. So a tip is actually, if you can get underneath, it's just to cut upwards, and it keeps it from pinching your blade that way. Alright, the next tip is to cut logs in increments of 4 feet. This is helpful if you decide to use the log for making lumber. Then you'll have even increments of 8 or 12 feet. But then also if you decide to cut it down to firewood, 16 inches goes into 4 foot increments evenly. Alright, and then another way that you can deal with logs that pinch is to simply use a wedge on the top and then go ahead and finish off your cut on the log. So if you have a 16-inch chainsaw blade, you can simply use the blade itself to measure out the rounds to cut for firewood. And since we cut this out in 4 foot increments, it comes out evenly cutting the 16-inch rounds. And with the chainsaw, you should be having more chips like this coming out versus it looking like sawdust. If it looks like sawdust, then it needs to be sharpened. When you go to sharpen your blade, a helpful tip is to mark the first tooth with a Sharpie. So what this does is you go through and sharpen each of the teeth on there. By the time you get back around to where you see your Sharpie mark again, you'll know that you've done them all evenly. When transporting the wood, it's helpful to put pieces vertically along the edges. This helps to hold more stuff in, but then it also makes them more stable as you go over bumps and so forth. So in here we've got some logs that are laying flat, and then around the edges we're able to hold more by putting them up vertically. You can see here, even when we're going over bumps and it's rocky, all the wood is staying in place. The same technique works well with wheelbarrows as well to help you be able to carry a lot more wood. Alright, so the next trick is to help estimate the height of trees. So here we'll use a shadow, and I place a marker there towards the top of my shadow and then count it out with my feet how long the shadow was. Similarly, you measure out the length of the shadow from the tree. Alright, then to estimate the tree height, you basically take your height and divide it by the shadow that you create and multiply that by the shadow length of the tree, and that will give you the height of the tree, which in this case is 62 feet. Alternative way is to go 90 degrees to where you're going to cut the tree, walk away a distance, and then use something visually to kind of rotate and turn and kind of give you a pretty good idea of where the tree is going to fall. Alright, here I'm counting out 62 feet from the tree. I'll put a marker there and we'll see how close it falls to it. So I made the cut, ended up going to the left a little bit more to avoid those little trees that were in front of me. I didn't want to crush them with the fall. But then as we pick up the camera here and bring it over, we can see that our estimate actually worked out pretty well. Normally I don't get it kind of dead on like this, so there's top of the tree and then there's the markers that we put, so it kind of hit it dead on. Alright, the next tip is to use a downward wedge cut. And what this is helpful for if you're falling a tree, let's say onto a lawn or something, and you don't want the branches to impact the lawn too much, it's good to use a cut like this, because when it falls, most of the impact is going to happen with the bottom part of the tree. So when it falls here, it's going to fall at an angle, and the bottom of the tree is going to kind of hit first, take most of the impact, versus on our upward wedge, and it doesn't show it too much here, but it's going to kind of fall with the top of the tree first. For moving logs or stumps, it's really helpful to use a chain with a simple choke loop on it. So here I just wrap it around and then I use the hook to attach back on the same side, so as it pulls it's going to tighten around there. And with this one I got a really long chain, so I'm just doing it with both ends and then I'll hook it up to the hitch. The nice part with chains is that they're really strong, and then they won't bind like ropes typically well, where it's tougher to get the knots out. They just come apart pretty easily. You can also use the same technique just to get a grip on the log if you need to be able to move it around and use your legs to pull it to where you need it to go. To help split wood that has an angled side to this, like this piece does, it's helpful to use this alternate wood splitting method. So you basically have a half log on the ground, then you place a piece on there and you can split it down like that. What's helpful with this as well is you're splitting the wood and you're swinging the axe kind of right at the ground, so there's less of a chance of it swinging back towards you if you miss. With the more traditional splitting method, it's helpful to swing through the log itself and try to land on the cutting block below. If you don't do that, you can have a tendency to have your axe swing off to the side where it could potentially come back and hit you. Alright, last tip I have is to cycle through your wood. So for me, a lot of the trees that I fall down, I first kind of set it out for a year. It could be used for building a lot of different projects. We've used our logs for building carports, benches, 360 seesaws for the kids, chicken coop, raised garden beds and trellises, a tree house, climbing wall, workout equipment, a coat hanger wall, legs for an island. And then if we don't use the log for any of those things, then we'll go ahead and cut it out for firewood. Alright, then one bonus tip for any wood, little scrap pieces that doesn't go anywhere else. Alright, so if you got little scrap pieces of wood like this, just simply keep a box. Put all these ones that are not good for stacking, kind of leave them close to the house there, but when we're ready to use it, then we can go ahead and just pull it from the box, put it in there, but they're not really good for stacking. So just putting them in the box works well. Alright, well that's all for today. Thanks for watching.